we are going to start something new with this surprise. And then we'll wrap up and go. I'm going to grade you guys. Last week was preseason. I won't count it against you, Tom, but I let Cole wins last week.
I agree with you.
If you missed it, I'll link it at the end of this video and you can go back.
We don't have to do that. We can just move on with our lives. It was preseason.
It's awesome. I won.
Realignment draft. It's like out of conference games, once the Big Ten and the SEC, schedule them. They're just preseason at this point. So grading starts this week. We didn't bring this up. We didn't talk about it in the show, but it is obviously one of the bigger stories in college football. Maybe not as sexy, maybe not as exciting as the realignment draft, but let's talk about spring games. And are they going away? Is this good or bad for the sport? I want your take on that. And then I want you to, if you see this as a problem, how do you fix it? What can schools, what can programs do going forward? My hot take is that by 27, we probably won't have any spring games as they're known now. Maybe not even next year, but we'll see kind of how the tide goes there. Cole, you won last week, so you can go first on this. What's your take here?
I think spring games are important for one major reason. It brings the community together in the world of college football. Because here's the thing. I went to the University of Alabama, so I have ties to one of the biggest institutions in all of college football. A-Day was such a prominent moment, and it wasn't because of the actual game that was being on the field or seeing a new head coach in the works, whether it was Lane Kiffin calling one side and Kirby calling the other, or it was eventually Mike Locksley, or it was Steve Sarkisian. It was the fact that for a lot of Alabama fans, that was the one time they got to go to Bryant-Denny Stadium and watch Alabama football up close and in person because it was a free event. And so when you look at what the spring game was, so many people that would drive into Tuscaloosa that weekend and the revenue it would bring into that program, to the businesses around there, it was so prominent because of fans that truly love the Tide. And we know how much they love the Tide would be able to get to watch their team actually play football, meaningful reps. And you would feel like that the team was trending in the right direction underneath Nick Saban because of who were the players that were starting to stand on out. And the transfer portal at the time wasn't riddling names that were second and third string players, but still you felt confident about the direction of your team going into the year. So maybe it's different at other locations like it is at Ole Miss. They don't have a spring game. They have spring events that go on there. And it works, and the fans are really excited about it. And you know what? Lane Kiffin does a good job of making sure the fans are still involved. But at other locations, when this is the one time, I know a lot of Texas fans are furious because of how much of an enjoyment they got from the orange and white game. I think that there's value there. Now, with that being said, I understand the reasoning why you are getting rid of spring games. The big one for me is that, number one, you're protecting your roster. Because the last thing you want to do is let your kid go out and have incredible tape, and then a school from the Group of Five level says, we'll pay you $200,000 to come be our starting quarterback, and they transfer on in, and now you're down a backup that could really hurt your roster. But the other thing is that spring games for some locations were losing money. Georgia was losing money is losing money in Athens every single year. Ole Miss was losing money. Missouri was losing money. So I can understand that it's just not worth the risk when it comes to paying for that price. But you have to have something in the process in return. There's so much value of just true college football fans all meeting and signaling in one vicinity to watch their team play. And it may be the only time they get to see their team play. You have to have something that can replace it. Maybe it's not a spring game, but it has to be a spring event to where players meet with fans, and fans get to see up close and in person what is their roster moving forward.
Tom?
I think it hurts the soul of college football. This is very much a heart versus brain situation. I'll tell you guys a story. When I was a sophomore at Penn State, I went to the blue-white game, and my brother and his friends filled up a truck bed full of ice and beer with a tarp underneath. It was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. This is when Asher Ross, I Love College, had just gotten popular, if you remember the time I'm talking about. And my sister brought a friend of hers from high school, and she was looking at going to Penn State. And what she saw was an enormous IM field full of people tailgating, doing a variety of different things, and an enormous tarp that we then laid out on the grass and created a gigantic slip and slide. It was insane. She went to Rhode Island. She did not go to Penn State. This is an atmosphere that is so much fun. And as somebody, again, Penn State is my example because I went there. It's when the area thaws and you can actually go outside. You get a look at team. It's nice to be around fellow tailgaters because we miss the sport. That's the thing we love about this game, is that it is that sense of community, which I really, really appreciate. So there's my heart. My brain is telling me, yes, Penn State and plenty of other teams literally just played a 16 game, 17 game schedule deep into January, which has never happened before. Yes, academics are actually a part of this thing. These kids have to go to class. I think the business of college football is going to win out when it comes to this whole thing. I think an enormous mistake would be going to the NFL preseason model. A lot of people have talked about like NFL OTAs. I'm fine with that in terms of cut down winter workouts, still have spring ball, but you just kind of change that a little bit. Incoming freshmen, yeah, you've got work to do. But a guy who is a redshirt senior or a true senior that is like, hey, been there, done that, needs to rest his body, you do what you have to do for roster management. But a huge mistake would be turning week 0 into, oh man, Citadel didn't get to play Alabama this year, but like we'd still like to have that game. Well, here's the problem. You may pay that team $1 million to come get their ass kicked. That team is going to be treating it like it's the Super Bowl. And you're going to set up your team, Alabama in this example, for injury, for problems, even if you're playing second, third, fourth stringers trying to get those guys out there. If you treat it like a preseason game, one team is going to think that. The other team is going to look at it, my chance all of a sudden to get myself seen in the national spotlight. Maybe I get to transfer someplace bigger. Maybe I get to play on another team or get a bag, something like that. I think that's a huge mistake, but you're probably going to have to come up with some sort of replacement because to the points that Cole made, this is a community event where it does drive revenue. It affects multiple departments for all these schools. It affects multiple sports, all of them getting a chance to come together in the spring. So how are you going to replace that? A lot of these schools have moved towards utilizing their football stadiums for things other than sports. You're seeing a lot more concerts, a lot more artists go into these stadiums. Okay, are you going to replace that in some capacity? And by the way, use that as an NIL avenue, machine, engine, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of opportunities out there. The mistake that college football will make is, oh, let's just put another game on the calendar in August or in November or December. That's a part of the regular season. And again, we're coming back to no one cares about athletes in this whole thing. No one cares about the kids that are actually playing this game. More TV time, more money. Unfortunately, the networks are going to win out on this one.
Yeah, I have a hard time with this because for what Cole said, I do agree. And I love what Tom said about tying in the NIL thing. So I'll give you both a chance to wrap up closing thoughts on this. Tom with a slight lead as we head into the final stretch.
Oh, God.
But what Cole said is so right. Programs do see this as a loss, right? Like this is, even if you charge, right, $5 a ticket to get in, most universities are losing money on this thing. And so I get that. But the spring game was 100% for the fans, right? Like what Mike Norvell or Steve Sarkisian or what any of these coaches do in a spring game, it probably doesn't vary too much from what they're, maybe they play a little bit longer of a scrimmage than they would in a 11-on-11 in a closed practice. But the spring game was completely for the fans. And the things you guys have mentioned, going to A-Day, going to the Penn State stuff, me going to Florida State events, it was 100% so that you could take your kids to something that was a little lower intensity. There's more room to move around, right? You can kind of enjoy that. Maybe you can't afford to go in the fall. And so for athletic departments who bleed money and lose money in a lot of other dumb ways with inflated salaries and sports that lose money for an entire year and things like that, for them to basically say, we're going to take away this thing that is just for the fans, when we are asking the fans to keep the lights on, continue to give booster donations, buy season tickets. Oh yeah, now donate to NIL in our collectives. We're going to take away this one thing that loses money that was totally about the fans. In addition to the fact that with the transfer portal, you're not developing these long relationships with guys who are playing 4 and 5 years at a lot of universities anymore. I don't love it from that perspective. And I understand it's all dollars and cents at the end of the day. I understand that most of the people running this sport do not love this sport like we do. But I agree with, they got to do something. They got to do something to get back to the fans because they're eventually going to alienate enough of their fans who don't want to give to NIL, who don't care about these players because they're off one roster onto the next every other year. And then they're taking away some of the things that become special. More neutral site games, less big home games than we've ever seen before. Why did Florida State and LSU play in New Orleans and Orlando when what fans wouldn't want to go to Baton Rouge or Tallahassee for those games? So I don't know. I think that you're just, it's another, needle in the haystack, right? Like, but it's another straw on the camel's back. Let's use the right cliche there. That it just, again, spring games were for the fans And when these programs are looking to cut, I guess I buy a little bit of the protect your roster stuff. Next year, when the spring window goes away, we'll see if Nebraska brings it back or not, since that was Rule's complaint. But I don't know. I just think that something has to be done in that springtime or maybe over the summer. I don't really care when, that you can somewhat give back to the fans. I love what Ole Miss does. I actually love what UF does, where they tie in a lot of NIL to it. Tom mentioned that. I think that's a really good play. Shoot, put the thing on TV. And again, this doesn't protect your roster, but next year when the spring window's not there, put the thing on TV. Even if fans can't come tailgate, at least let them watch the game, right? And so something needs to be done. Again, I don't know if either of you have closing thoughts or what can be done or something creative or just want to wrap it up, but those are my thoughts on this.
Overall, the entire college football calendar needs to be revisited. It's something Penn State Athletic Director Pat Kraft talked about earlier on this week. It was extremely unfair, unintentionally, but it's unfair to ask a football fan to fly all the way to State College, Pennsylvania, for instance, to watch Penn State versus SMU. And then in the second round, hey, by the way, we're in Phoenix in 10 days to watch them play Boise State. And then 10 days later, we're in Miami to play Notre Dame. I had friends asking me about going to the Orange Bowl, and I was like, well, if they make the national title, I'm all in on that one. So now you're potentially looking at a diehard fan spending money on flights, hotel rooms for 4 different games at max within the college football playoff. Like, how much more are you going to ask of fans that are already pouring into this sport? The beauty of college football is that any corner of the country can be king for one day. It's why I fell in love with this. It's why the SEC, in my opinion, galvanizes whole states as a part to cities. And that's been the tactic of the Big Ten and expansion lately, is trying to go after TV markets. And you've seen how the SEC is like, we're going to own the Carolinas. We are going to own Kentucky. We are going to own Texas. We're going to own Oklahoma. We are just... You're grabbing those fans that care about this from a grassroots level, from a community level, that this is the most important thing in their entire world. And unfortunately, the sport's getting more and more expensive for fans. And you have to remind yourself that this is not a fan base that it's like, oh yeah, I can afford to chuck over a couple $1,000s for every single game. One game a year is their Christmas. It's their Mecca. So being able to have the spring game has been this wonderful luxury, great introduction for families, that sort of thing. The answer is not more games, but unfortunately, I think that's what we're going to get.
Make it a Pro Bowl style event. That would
the
be
Pro
my
Bowl sucks, though.
But what I'm saying is that like Ole Miss is a perfect example. They have events that allow them to let players not really play in a game,
Right.
but more so like a 7-on-7. There's like a tug of war event. There's like certain things
Right.
where fans
Slam
get to
dunk,
involve, and they get to see their team while still going through practice. And yes, is that going to be the best solution out there? Probably not. But what I will say is at least it gives you a reason to go check out the team. At least it gives you a reason to feel like that the atmosphere surrounding the roster is still promising. Something along those lines at least gives fans a reason to want to come visit their alma maters. And Tom brought this up. And here's a part that I think a lot of people also forget. It's a way for you to introduce your fans, your family and younger kids to what college football is. It's an atmosphere. It's a tailgate. It's what is actually leading up to the event that you get to go inside of a stadium. It's seeing why you were so ravenous and you're screaming at your television at 2:30 in the morning. Like, it allows you to get indoctrinated into college football. So there has to be some event there. I think Ole Miss, the way they do it, is probably the closest thing to perfection in a new era where you still are having events, fans are still coming on out, there still is a reason to go visit your alma mater, and you're willing to go ahead and see your roster at least have a little bit of adaptability. I think what Lane Kiffin has done is probably the most marketable way of keeping your team active without having anybody get hurt and you not wasting millions of dollars.
The Ole Miss event is probably more fun for young kids too, if we're being very fair. My 7-year-old would not care about seeing a scrimmage. My 7-year-old would flip out about seeing a tug of war. Right now, 13, 14, maybe they care more about the football games. But no, I agree. I mean, hopefully something is done. But again, maybe nothing is done. Maybe it just goes away completely, and the people that love this sport are disappointed again by the people who don't give a crap. So, man, if I have to pick a winner on this one, I'll go with Tom. It was close. It was really close. The beer in the back of the tailgate is probably what put it over the top for me. That
was a great time from what I remember.
Seemed like a good memory. That's
whatever. It's preseason, still in my mind.
Fountains and beer.
Hey, thanks for watching The Power 2. If you like this type of content, make sure you hit subscribe and check out some of our other videos found here on the channel.